This is Ishmael Chapter 7, sections 1 and 2. Here's a puzzle for you to consider, said Ishmael. You're in a faraway land and find yourself in a strange city, isolated from all others. You're immediately impressed by the people you find there. They're friendly, cheerful, healthy, prosperous, vigorous, peaceable, and well-educated. And they tell you things have been this way for as long as anyone can remember. Well, you're glad to break your journey here, and one family invites you to stay with them. That night, you sample their food at dinner, and finding it delicious but unfamiliar, ask them what it is. And they say, "Oh, it's bee meat, of course. That's all we eat." This naturally puzzles you, and you ask them if they mean the meat of the little insects that gather honey. They laugh, and they take you to the window. "There are some bees over there," they say, pointing to their neighbors in the next house. "Good Lord," you exclaim in horror. "You don't mean that you eat people?" And they look at you in a puzzled way and say, "We eat bees." "How atrocious," you reply. "Are they your slaves then? Do you keep them penned up?" "Why on earth should we keep them penned up?" your hosts ask. "Well, to keep them from running away, of course." By now your hosts are beginning to think that you're a little weak in the head. And they explain that the bees would never think of running away because their own food, the A's, live right across the street. Well, I won't wear you with all your outraged exclamations and their baffled explanations. Eventually you piece together the whole ghastly scheme. The A's are eaten by the bees, and the bees are eaten by the C's, and the C's in turn are eaten by the A's. There is no hierarchy among these food classes. The C's don't lord it over the bees just because the bees are their food. Because after all, they themselves are the food of the A's. It's all perfectly democratic and friendly. But of course, it's all perfectly dreadful to you. And you ask them how they can stand to live in this lawless way. Once again, they look at you in bafflement. "What do you mean lawless?" they ask. "We have a law, and we follow it invariably. This is why we're friendly and cheerful and peaceable and all those other things you find so attractive in us. This law is the foundation of our success as a people and has been so from the beginning." Here at last is the puzzle. Without asking them, how can you discover what law it is they follow? I blinked at him for a moment. I can't imagine. Think about it. Well, obviously their law is A's eat C's and B's eat A's and C's eat B's. Ishmael shook his head. These are food preferences. No law is required. I need something more to go on then. All I've got is their food preferences. You have 3 other things to go on. They have a law, they follow it invariably, and because they follow it invariably, they have a highly successful society. It's still very tenuous, unless it's something like, be cool. I'm not asking you to guess what the law is. I'm asking you to devise a method for discovering what the law is. I slid down in my chair, folded my hands on my stomach, and stared at the ceiling. After a few minutes, I had an idea. Is there a penalty for breaking the law? Death. Then I'd wait for an execution. Ishmael smiled. Ingenious, but hardly a method. Besides, you're overlooking the fact that the law is obeyed invariably. There has never been an execution. I sighed and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, I said, observation. Careful observation over a long period. That's more like it. What would you be looking for? For what they didn't do, for what they never did. Good, but how would you go about eliminating irrelevancies? For example, you might find that they never slept standing on their heads, or that they never threw rocks at the moon. There would be a million things that they never did, but these wouldn't necessarily be prohibited by the law. True. Well, let's see. They have a law, they follow it invariably, and according to them, following this law has given them a society that works very well. Am I supposed to take that seriously? Certainly, it's part of the hypothesis. Then this would eliminate most of the irrelevancies. The fact that they never sleep standing on their heads wouldn't have anything to do with having a society that works well. Let's see, in effect, what I would actually be looking for is, I would be closing in on it from 2 sides. From one side, I would be saying, what is it that makes this society work? And from the other side, I would be saying, what is it they don't do that makes the society work? Bravo! Now, since you've worked this out so brilliantly, I'm going to give you a break. There's going to be an execution after all. For the first time in history, someone has broken the law that is the foundation of their society. They're outraged, horrified, astounded. They take the offender, cut him into little bits, and feed him to the dogs. This should be a big help to you in discovering their law. Yes, I'll take the part of your host. We've just been to the execution. You may ask questions. Okay, just what did this guy do? He broke the law. Yes, but specifically what did he do? Ishmael shrugged. He lived contrary to the law. He did the things we never do. I glared at him. That's not fair. You're not answering my questions. I tell you, the whole sorry tale is public record, young man. His biography, complete in every detail, is available at the library. I grunted. So how are you going to use this biography? It doesn't say how he broke the law. It's just a complete record of how he lived, and much of it is bound to be irrelevant. Okay, but I can see that it gives me another guide. I now have 3. What makes their society work well, what they never do, and what he did that they never do. Very good. These are precisely the 3 guides you have to the law that we're looking for here. The community of life on this planet has worked well for 3 billion years, has worked beautifully, in fact. The takers draw back in horror from this community, thinking that it is a place of lawless chaos and savage, relentless competition, where every creature goes in terror of its life. But those of your species who actually live in this community don't find it to be so, and they will fight to the death rather than be separated from it. It is, in fact, an orderly community. The green plants are food for the plant eaters, which are food for the predators, and some of those predators are food for still other predators, and what's left over is food for the scavengers who return to the earth nutrients needed by the green plants. It's a system that has worked magnificently for billions of years. Filmmakers understandably love footage of gore and battle, but any naturalist will tell you that the species are not in any sense at war with one another. The gazelle and lion are enemies only in the minds of the takers. The lion that comes across the herd of gazelles doesn't massacre them as an enemy would. He kills one not to satisfy its hatred of gazelles, but to satisfy its hunger. And once it has made its kill, the gazelles are perfectly content to go on grazing with the lion right there in their midst. All this comes about because there is a law that is followed invariably within the community. And without this law, the community would indeed be in chaos and would very quickly disintegrate and disappear. Man owes his very existence to this law. If the species around him had not obeyed it, he would not have come into being or survived. It's a law that protects not only the community as a whole, but species within the community and even individuals. Do you understand? I understand what you're saying, but I have no idea what the law is. I'm pointing to its effects. Oh, okay. It is the peacekeeping law, the law that keeps the community from turning into a howling chaos the takers imagine it to be. It's the law that fosters life for all. Life for the grasses, life for the grasshopper that feeds on the grasses, life for the quail that feeds on the grasshopper, and life for the fox that feeds on the quail. Life for the crows that feed on the dead fox. The club-finned fish that nosed the shores of the continents came into being because hundreds of millions of generations of life before them had followed this law. And some of them became amphibians following this law. And some amphibians became reptiles following this law. And some of the reptiles became birds and mammals following this law. And some of the mammals became primates following this law. And one branch of primates became Australopithecus following this law. And Australopithecus became Homo habilis following this law. And Homo habilis became Homo erectus following this law. And Homo erectus became Homo sapiens following this law. And Homo sapiens became Homo sapiens sapiens following this law. And then about 10,000 years ago, one branch of the family of Homo sapiens sapiens said, man is exempt from this law. The gods never meant to be bound by it. And so they built a civilization that flouts the law at every point. And within 500 generations, in an eye blink in the scale of biological time, this branch of family of Homo sapiens sapiens saw that they had brought the entire world to the point of death. And their explanation for this calamity was, what? Huh? Man lived harmlessly on this planet for some 3 million years, but the takers have brought the whole thing to the point of collapse in only 500 generations. And their explanation for this is what? I see what you mean. Their explanation is that something is fundamentally wrong with people. Not that you takers may be doing something wrong, but rather that there is something fundamentally wrong with human nature itself. That's right. How do you like that explanation now? I'm beginning to have my doubts about it. Good.